You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio. It's the Friday Sports Show of your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing news from local area around the world. We aim to interview some of the world's best professionals in sport and other fields too. We're very fortunate to show in some of the best people in the field of sport, football, also psychologists, psychology, with a segment where we interview people in the field of psychology and related fields as well. We also interview people from various disciplines as well, the best in their field today. We have a very fascinating guest. Our guest today is Tammy Nelson, who's a Ph.D. in sex and relationship expert, an international speaker, an author, a licensed psychotherapist, and almost 30 years experience with individuals and couples. In private practice, she's focused on helping people of all ages, organisations and genders find love, healing and passion. She's been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Glamour Magazine, Cosmopolitan, Red Book, MSNBC, Men's Health, Women's Day, and writes for Psychotherapy Network, and is a blogger for Huffington Post and Your Tank. I've been very, very looking forward to interviewing today's guest. I'm sure that our listeners will be fascinating too, as well, in terms of what she has to say on all things relationships. Tammy, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on board. So, Tammy, let's if we could get an idea how you how did you get into what you do? Just for our listeners, in terms of how did you go into your profession?
Well, my mother told me I wanted to be an artist. My mother told me I would starve in a garret, and so instead I realized that since I was a little kid, people had been gathering on my front lawn to tell me their problems, and I realized that really it all starts with relationships, and if you're going to talk about relationships, you have to talk about sex. So I became a sex therapist, which I think is the mission of my life.
No, that's really fascinating. And I mean, now we have in the UK, it's spring, it's going into summer now, and you could say it's probably the wedding season. A lot of people probably tend to have their wedding in the spring, summer. What's your take on we see the statistics, I don't know off the top of my head, but obviously, a lot of marriages and relationships, people go on their own way. And I mean, what's your take on monogamy? Is it what people really want? Are we evolving into something new where it's becoming more acceptable to for people to not just stay with one person for life, but maybe try different relationships?
Well, we're having a new form of monogamy. It's not that people don't want to commit to one person. We still have what's called pair bonding, and from a sociological perspective, we still want to couple up. That's never going to change, I don't think. But we have a new, more open form of monogamy where people are living longer, they're staying sexual for longer, and they don't necessarily want to get divorced. So they don't want to trade their partner in for someone else, but they might want a more open, more fluid monogamy agreement where just because they are unique to each other, they might not want to be sexually or emotionally exclusive, but that doesn't mean they want to break up. So it's a whole new, this is not your grandmother's monogamy, put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's some controversy around that, I suppose, with some people. Why do you think that might be? Why do you think some people who call for this open monogamy, why do you think that might be a bit controversial for some people?
Well, of course it's scary when we first get married or when we first commit to someone. We think, this is our person forever, and we're never going to be attracted to anyone else, and we're never going to want to be or look at or think about another person for the rest of our lives. And that works for the first couple years, but the reality is we're married, we're not dead, right?
Yeah.
So that part of us is not going to necessarily die off, and it doesn't reflect on our partner. It doesn't mean that we don't love our partner and that they're not our number one priority. And that is a shift in how I think this new generation is thinking about sexual exclusivity and about love. Can we love more than one person? Can we have other people and still love our partner? It's a whole new way of thinking. It can be really scary, absolutely. And it's not for everyone. That's for sure.
And absolutely. And I suppose monogamy I suppose it's been perceived as the gold standard for relationships for a long time. But I mean, you could also say that infidelity and divorce has existed for a long time as well. And I suppose, where does it leave the institution of marriage and the traditional idea of that one sort of person for the rest of somebody's life. Do you think that, are we going to sort of, like you mentioned there, maybe there's a generation of people who might see things differently? Where do you sort of see things going for the institution of marriage and the idea of just that one person for life?
Well, I think, I gave a TED talk and I said, I think that worked great when we were married for like 10, 15 years. And by the time you got bored with someone, you were dead. That was great. That was fine.
Yeah.
But now we're like, we live forever. We live to like 90, 95 sometimes. And you're supposed to be with someone and be monogamous for almost a half a century more. Quarters of a century. And the reality is, many people will pretend they're monogamous. They have this sort of shadow monogamy. Or pretend monogamy where they say, oh no, we're totally monogamous, but they cheat on each other, or they have this parallel relationship online. And so even though we give all this energy to this idea of monogamy, statistically, most people are not monogamous. So can we be more focused on, instead of monogamy as morality, monogamy as integrity? Like, can we say, let's be honest and transparent and talk about what we really want and what we really need, and have that be the most important thing in our relationship?
Yeah, and I suppose, like, in terms of, say, let's say a couple were to get married in the not so distant future, and how would they sort of agree to it? Tammy, how would it work? Was it something that to sort of go into the marriage knowing that there might be open monogamy, or what are your thoughts on how that would go about to navigate that sort of agreement?
Well, first of all, if you're thinking about it and you're listening to this, I wouldn't run home and say, oh my God, we're going to open our relationship. I would take it really slow, talk for a long time. My book is called Open Monogamy, and it has a lot of exercises in it, which basically, start off with a what-if conversation. Like, what if we were going to do this? What would it look like? And how would we do it? And how would we feel? And talk about it for a long, long time before you take anything into action. And really talk about your feelings and the fantasy before you pull any strings on and make any moves. And I think sometimes you could just talk about it in fantasy for the rest of your life before you do anything, and maybe that'll be enough. But sure, communication is the key. If you can't communicate about it, then it's probably not for you. Yeah,
I'm sort of guessing that. I suppose in one sense, if there's probably more chance of people staying together if that's what they want, if they both agree to it in their relationship. And I guess if they didn't stay in their relationship, it might be that they have a preference of sort of moving on. Like you said, people like living a lot longer now than they used to do, and maybe maybe they sort of grow apart type thing. But do you think that are there any sort of benefits? What are some of the benefits that you think of maybe like living this way? Someone chose to sort of go down this path.
Well, actually, the couples that can make it work say that it brings more excitement, more sexual energy, more. It helps the relationship to last longer, and they have more fun. It's kind of like adding a second adolescence into your life. But I can warn you that it's not a good way to save your marriage, and it's not a way to heal from infidelity. Like, if you've already had a big betrayal or trauma, I would not use opening your relationship as a way to try to repair. I would go to therapy or work on it first. I think you need a solid foundation.
Absolutely.
In order to make any kind of changes first.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone listening in is interested to know more about your work, Tammy, is there anywhere they can go, like in terms of like any sort of website? Can you point them in any direction in terms of where they can sort of learn more about what you do and your work?
Yeah, I mean, you can find out about my book, Open Monogamy. You can go to openmonogamy.com or go to my website, drtamynelson.com, and you can find my TED Talk at Open Monogamy. And really, start slow and listen to my podcast, The Trouble with Sex. Find a therapist or an expert if you're having trouble before you try it on your own, if you're worried about how to do it and how not to hurt each other.
Absolutely. And I really want to thank you for coming aboard the show. Tammy was, fascinating. No doubt that the listeners have been really intrigued and possibly want to sort of know more and have a read of the book and get to know more about, obviously, the work that you do, which is difficult to cover everything that you do in the short time that we have. But it's been great to have you on the show. That was Dr. Tammy Nelson, who's very kind to join us on the show as a sex and relationship expert, international speaker, who's very kind to join us at 94.4 FM, the Friday sports show of your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.